Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our session, Pets as Family, a look at legislation. Across the US, laws are shifting as courts and legislators increasingly recognize pets as integral members of our family. So today, we will be offering an accessible overview of the expanding legal recognition of companion animals across key areas of law, and we'll explore how these changes help reduce barriers to services, strengthen program outcomes, and support whole family well-being. My name is Kris Maun, and I will be your moderator today. I am a directing attorney with Homebase. Homebase is a mission-driven nonprofit dedicated to building community capacity to end homelessness, reduce poverty, and foster thriving communities. We provide customized assistance grounded in the needs of each community and develop responsive solutions that have a lasting impact towards our goal of making homelessness brief, rare, and non-recurring. I am very excited to introduce our two panelists from Heart. Heart is a community-rooted legal and advocacy organization dedicated to keeping people and their pets safely housed. They work alongside families facing eviction or housing instability, offering free legal support. Heart partners closely with service providers across Los Angeles because to help prevent in order to help prevent unnecessary displacement and help families together. With us today are Diana Cruz Rivas and Nathaly Medina. Diana is the executive director of Heart. She first connected with Heart as a tenant navigating a wrongful eviction, and she now leads the organization's legal and community advocacy to keep families and their companion animals safely housed. Diana's background in community engagement and housing justice is shaped by her lived experience, deep compassion, and a commitment to culturally responsive care. Nathaly is a senior associate at Walsworth who specializes in complex toxic tort litigation. She's an accomplished trial attorney and an undefeated first chair record, and is known for translating complicated legal issues into clear, human-centered guidance. Before joining Walsworth, Nathaly served as a staff attorney at Heart, and she now continues her commitment to housing justice as Heart's board member and director of Pro Bono. Without further ado, I'm very excited to turn it over to Diana and Nathaly.
Yay, thank you so much, Kris. Let me get our slides going for you all to see. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Again, thank you, Kris. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. This is definitely one of my favorite conferences. I look forward to it every year, and it's such an honor to be able to be a part of it. Um, well, today we'll be exploring the growing recognition, the growing shift. We'll be using that word a lot today of seeing pets as members of the family. We'll be looking at key statutes, new case law, and what these changes mean for housing safety and stability. All right, if you'll bear with me too while I go through my notes here. Well, in our work, we think a lot about displacement. We think about the displacement of people, of whole entire communities, and what we know as Los Angeles, which is where we live. Los Angeles is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva, Chumash, and Quiche peoples, and we honor their ongoing stewardship of this land. And this lens of displacement continues to really shape our commitment to housing justice for all communities, but especially those who have historically faced displacement and marginalization. And if you want to learn more about the history of the land that you are on, we encourage you to look it up on natives/land.ca. It's a searchable map of Native territories, languages, and treaties. Okay. And I love this slide. I love all of the photos. Our work at Heart really sits at the intersection of housing justice and animal well-being. Heart was founded about 8 years ago now to address the gap between that intersection. And in our work, we support tenants and unhoused family members that are navigating crisis with their animals and when legal barriers are putting them at risk of separation. And we do this by providing free legal services, know your rights trainings, and pet inclusive housing advocacy. You can see in some of these photos, we're at some of those community-based events, often in tandem with animal well-being partners. And as you can see, the work is very near and dear to us, right? I started off as a client of Heart, and Nathaly, I know also has strong familial ties with where we live in our communities. And we are in the little corner, you can see us in our creatures. For me, it's a magic moment of when my cat and my dog decided to be in the same space together. It was a miracle. And Nat there is with her dog Che. Fun fact, we found out that our dogs are cousins through a fun little DNA test. So it's a small little community here, but we definitely love to keep it together. Okay. I am chronically online, so I really get a kick out of these memes. But the question here is why, right? Why are we seeing this shift? What is driving this national shift in how the law treats companion animals? And we know historically that pets were legally treated as property, no different from furniture or your bank accounts. But courts and legislatures now acknowledge that this framework doesn't match our lived experience. People structure their emotional, financial, and caregiving lives around their animals, right? Who's going to take care of you when you're older? My dog, right? If we don't have human children. And I love the dad and the dogs they didn't want. They're always like, no dog in my house. And then all of a sudden they're printing t-shirts with their face on them and they're letting them go everywhere with them. And my personal favorite one is leaving your dog at grandma's house and where they get spoiled rotten. And are really treated like grandchildren. And this is like all fun, but I think it's really, really getting to the like core of our presentation today is this. We've now are seeing pets as family so much more than we have in the past. Um, and again, I love chronically online. I love a meme. All right. And so we're seeing this shift play out in custody cases, domestic violence protection, housing access, estate planning, and even in immigration situations. But it's important to note that this shift isn't just sentimental, right? It's practical. It impacts where people live, how they flee from violence, and how they maintain stability. There it is. Now we've got a fun little poll for y'all. Um, And before we started, in several states, pets are legally recognized as part of the family unit in specific contexts. And Nathaly will speak more to this. But what I want to emphasize is that while this shift isn't yet a universal standard, the momentum is strong. States keep introducing new bills each session, often with bipartisan support. And if you'd like to take a moment, either scan the QR code or not, the question is, in a recent Newsweek report, what percentage of Americans said that their pets are family? And you've got a couple of different options to choose there. But while y'all are doing that, I'd like to reflect on my own experience as the daughter of immigrant parents. My mom would always tell me that when she was growing up, she was surrounded by animals, but they were always outside. They coexisted, but they never slept in beds with them, right? Little did she know that, down the line, her daughter Me would bring in a cat, and that's her best friend now. They sleep in the same bed. They have the same morning and bedtime routine. And it's such a sweet bond that I love so much. And if you are done with that quiz, um, I don't think it's a surprise, but it's 97%, right? 97% of Americans said that pets are considered family. That's huge, right? Again, no surprise to us. We're here because we're animal lovers. But it's growing, right? It's growing across the US. Um, and with that, I'll pass it off to you, Nat.
Thank you so much, Diana, for getting us started. And definitely, I relate to all of that. Whenever I take my dog, if I go on vacation, he goes to grandma's house, and my mom will refer to my dog as her grandson. um, so, Diana touched on this already, but basically, pets are at this weird area in the law where they have historically always been treated just like property and nothing else. But in lots of specific contexts, we're seeing the law change to recognize the cultural reality that pets are our family, and that the law treating them solely as property is not really it's not really getting to the center of the issue, right? And so we see that there are a few states, and it keeps growing, of states that do award custody of pets, and the analysis that they use is like the best interest of the animal. um, the first state actually to enact this type of law was Alaska, which I was, sort of surprised to see Alaska be the pioneer in this area. But like Diana said, this is the type of pets tend to live in this space that is beyond red state, blue state. And you do see these laws popping up in a lot of jurisdictions across the US. And so we also do have, so there are two ways that the law is shifting. One, it's states passing specific laws that give this special status to pets, that recognize their place in our families. But it also happens in case law. Like you see, there's this New York case that said for emotional damages in certain contexts, a dog is considered part of your immediate family, just like parents, children, and to a certain extent, grandparents. We see that the first time that this type of law was enacted was in 2017 in Alaska. California following shortly after. Illinois was also an early adopter. But you see here how, in 2025, almost 10 years later, that states are still doing this. And actually, a cool thing about this Pennsylvania law is that it does formally recognize pet prenups. So, like a custody type agreement that you can enter into before, there's any issue with divorce. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's focus on one of the big areas where we have seen this change. It's pets in divorce and separation. So again, pets are just regular property. But like I said, the problem with that is that it doesn't really consider, well, who takes care of the pet? You're going to tell me that you're married, that I'll just put myself in that position. I'm getting a divorce, and you're going to tell me that my partner gets to keep the dog because he was the one who paid for the dog, and his name is on the registration, when I'm the one who walks him every day, and I'm the one who feeds him, and I'm the one that knows that he's sick and needs to take his medication at 10. I talk to the veterinarian. That would just feel fundamentally unfair. Well, before these laws existed, many judges and parties agreed that it just didn't feel right. And so there was informally judges in court saying, well, can't we reach some other agreement? Can't you just agree to share custody? Something like that. But now judges have a lot more help where they say, well, actually, what I'm going to look at is the best interest of the animal, just as I would look at the best interest of the child. That is the governing kind of rule that the judges are going to work with. And so it's going to ask, who's the primary caregiver? What's the daily routine? Are we going to disrupt, the animal's, life in a big way if we award to one person or to another? Who has the strongest emotional bond? When children come into the role, a pet, if an animal is very close to a certain child, courts will routinely award that animal to the primary caregiver of the child, regardless of who has title, who owns, right? Like a pet is not a car, right? If you have a car and you're getting a divorce and you say, well, I use the car every day and I wash the car and I pay for the tune-up, the court's going to say, well, that's bad luck. Actually, the other person has title of the car. They own that car. So the law has changed to recognize that really we need to look at the well-being of the animal because that is in the best interest of everybody. Next slide. Another big area of law where we have seen that recognition of pets having that special status is in protective orders. So we're talking about restraining orders. In most states, when you are filing a restraining order, there's a little section in the paperwork, in the forms that have a little box or a place for you to fill out about pets. And the reason that that exists is because many states, and including federal laws, have recognized that pets are used by abusers as tools of control. It's something that you just see time and time again. And we also see that survivors, they have a hard time leaving for many reasons. And one of those reasons is I can't leave my dog here. But also somebody said that they were willing to take me in, but their landlord doesn't allow pets. So they said I can't bring my dog. So people will delay in leaving, or they're looking for a shelter and the shelter is, doesn't allow any pets. So we see that the law is saying, you know what, if we're going to make it easier for people to leave domestic violence situations, we need to help them with their companion animals. We need to make it easier for them to leave and to not allow abusers to use animals this way. We're a housing organization. We try to help people stay housed with their animals, but we get questions about, like custody type disputes all the time. And we have had many cases where, an abuser has a dog. That just tends to be the most common example. I'm sorry, I'm focusing so much on dogs versus other pets, but where this person had a dog and she was afraid that if she left, that the dog was going to be harmed to kind of get back at her. We have seen cases where the dog where the abusive partner has taken the dog and taken him to a shelter very far away to try to separate this person from their dog, just to kind of create more harm. And because the emotional attachment between people and their pets is so high. And so this is why, policy is so important, because without these laws that say, yes, if you're seeking a domestic violence restraining order, we're going to let you take that. We're going to apply that restraining order to the dog as well. We're going to apply that restraining order to the pet. We're going to offer that protection there, because we know that that person is not going to seek help if the help excludes the animal, right? And so, yeah, so we're just seeing that kind of continue to expand across states. Next slide. Okay, yeah. So other important areas where we have seen that expansion is trust and estates. So basically, this is where people, when they're doing their estate planning, they're planning for the day that they're no longer there, and they want to create a trust because they have an animal that they want to continue to be taken care of even when they're gone. And so trusts are typically something that you create for dependents. The fact that the law recognizes pets as dependents just is also sort of telling you, you know what, we recognize that somebody has a strong emotional attachment, and that they are allowed to plan financially for the care of that animal even after they're no longer with us. Other areas where we see this type of tension between property and pets, property and the family kind of come up. Like, no one ever thinks about it, but in immigration, when the ICE raids first started, like last year, very intensely, we were getting lots of questions saying, you know what, somebody was deported and their animal was left behind, and I'm taking care of their animal now, but I'm having issues with my landlord, or, I'm like, no one ever thinks about, oh, what are all the impacts that, this immigration policy can have. Um, Animals are also affected. There was a big surge in people coming to give up animals in light of the immigration raids that were happening. And so you see that shelters become overwhelmed. When the COVID was happening, there was a special law that was put in place saying that if you were taking in somebody because of COVID, you could take in their animal without getting evicted, regardless of the policy. That was like an emergency type of situation that the law, recognized that in the pandemic, we have to do something about this, because the animal shelters are getting overwhelmed by people kind of giving up their animals. It's in everyone's interest that people continue to care for the animals that they love. And so, we want to see that type of emergency laws kind of come into place for immigration too. So unfortunately, right now there isn't, huge laws that kind of come into play, but people have been creative and they thought, you can create a power of attorney, so that if you do end up being deported, you can have your animal. You can say, okay, if I'm gone, this is the person that is going to care for my animal, and that can give that person legal rights to make the choices they need to make for that animal. And then, of course, housing instability. We are an organization that focuses on housing law. And so we see, it's huge, because many people who, just like an abuser, a person who is a victim of domestic abuse, wants to, leave the situation, but finds it very difficult to do that because of their pet not being able to find a place to go. That's very common in like the unhoused space or people that have disabilities. So many buildings just automatically say no pets, right? And it just creates an additional barrier for someone to say, well, no, I have to go and prove that I have, that I suffer from, a certain like I suffer from depression, or I have high anxiety, and I need an emotional support animal to kind of help them be able to keep their animal with them, when the easiest thing would be for for landlords to just recognize that, people have pets just like people have, children. And so we've been seeing more and more, like back in the day, hotels were not pet friendly, but more and more they are pet friendly, because they don't want to lose that business, and so they're having to make accommodations. But we're needing the law to kind of catch up in terms of recognizing, the right that people have to have their pets with them in their housing. And you'll see landlords trying to, there are people that have a pet in their apartment. The landlord changes, and the landlord says, hey, actually, this is a no pet building. It's like, well, you can't do that. This person has had their pet for many, many years. And actually in LA, there is a law that says that you can't change an agreement allowing for pets to then no longer allow for pets, because it's just like, inherently cruel to allow someone to form an attachment and have that bond, and then say, what, actually, never mind, you have to get rid of your dog. We used to do what we call shelter prevention, where we sit outside of a shelter, and we see people, and we talk to people who are giving up their animal, to discuss what those reasons are. Because if it's a legal barrier, like a landlord saying you can't have that animal anymore, we come in and say, well, let's look at the facts. Is there something we can do? Can we establish this animal as an emotional support animal? So we're doing all of that. And also, there are, in the federal law context, when there is like subsidized housing, the federal law already recognizes that this is an important relationship, and that many people have, these ailments, and that they benefit from having an emotional support animal, and they will automatically allow one pet. That's a rule that we see in subsidized housing. And so we love to see that formalized and recognized, because we want it to be easier for people, not more difficult, right? And currently it's navigating the law and with your pet can still be very difficult, because the laws are so, if it's, you can have one set of rights in one state and another set of rights in another. You can even have more rights in a certain county in your state versus others. And so it's a complicated landscape to navigate if you don't know what the laws are, and it can be hard to keep up. So we want to continue to advocate for more laws that make it easier for people to have the families that they want to have. Next slide. Oh, and actually, that's it for my part. So I'm going to hand it back to Diana to continue on the policy advocacy side of things.
Thanks, Nat. Right. So even at the federal level, we are seeing a shift. And while these laws don't formally change the legal classification of animals as property, we can see is that the law, as Nat said, it needs to catch up. And it slowly is, right? It's creeping up with what lawmakers are finally realizing what us in animal well-being have known for years. And that's that some people will stay in dangerous situations rather than leave their animals behind, right? It's this conversation of coercive control that other presenters have talked about at this conference, and we mentioned earlier. And the PAWS Act created federal funding to support shelters in allowing survivors of domestic violence to bring their pets with them. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, Congress required disaster planning to include pets because, no surprise, right? People were refusing evacuation orders if they couldn't bring their pets with them. So the Pets Act was created as a direct response, requiring emergency response systems to plan for household pets. And stepping even further back, there is a global shift happening too, with more than 40 countries now recognizing animals as sentient beings. And that's huge, right? Because it impacts a lot of the legal areas that we mentioned previously, right? It's family law, housing, immigration, and beyond. Okay, some broader trends here. Bans on pet retail sales prohibit pet shops from selling dogs, cats, and sometimes rabbits from commercial breeders. Instead, stores are often limited to offering pets from shelters or rescues. Several states, including California, Maryland, Maine, Illinois, Washington, and New York, have passed laws along with hundreds of other cities. These pet bans signal a sense of anti-commodification around how we perceive pets, right? So there's this direct rejection of the idea that animals are merely commercial goods. And it's pushing our systems to think more deeply about the human-animal bond rather than seeing pets as just a transaction. And we're also seeing boundary testing legal challenges, like attempts to claim pets as dependents on taxes. And listen, if I could, I would. I absolutely would. And this is a case that's very recent. This is December of last year. A New York attorney sued the IRS to recognize her dog as a legal dependent for tax purposes. And her argument was that pets should be considered non-human dependents rather than just property. And the argument that she's making is that failing to treat pets as dependents is an unfair tax burden that discriminates against taxpayers whose dependents are not human, thereby violating equal protections. And the main problem is that the IRS isn't there yet, right? The IRS does not currently classify pets as property. Sorry, the IRS currently does classify pets as property, not dependents, right? Sorry, my brain wants them to. But this case in particular, unfortunately, it's expected to be dismissed, but even though it's unlikely to succeed right now, the fact that it even exists, the fact that we're talking about it, the fact that it's like, hey, me too, if I could, I would, right? It says a lot about where we're headed, and that, maybe one day it'll be different. All right, big takeaway here. And We know that just because people treat pets as their family members doesn't mean the law always will, right? Example, the IRS. And there is a gap between what is just and what the law is, right? And when we use that a lot and when we talk to our clients in housing. And our legal frameworks have to continue evolving to make sure we close that gap between what the law is and what is just. And we know that when systems ignore the human-animal bond, people are destabilized. And when systems support it, outcomes improve drastically across the board. Um, Pets are critical sources of emotional regulation and safety for many households, but especially those that are facing poverty, displacement, and violence. And we always say too in our work that in order to protect the pet, you must first protect the human, right? Every place the law protects us, it also has an opportunity to protect the animals who are a part of us, who are a part of our well-being. And you might be asking, okay, Diana, we know all this now, but what can we do? What are we doing with this? Well, for shelters, one of the biggest opportunities is to deepen or formalize pet inclusive policies. This can start with really practical steps like creating clear intake procedures for pets, building partnerships with other local community-based organizations, especially during times of emergencies, like evacuations, extreme heat, encampment sweeps, right? The disaster list goes on. Shelters can prepare templates for rapid pet intake, have emergency crates on hand, or develop MOUs with animal well-being partners who can provide temporary boarding, a big necessity, right? And this type of planning doesn't always have to require brand new resources. It's often about aligning what you already have, what you already do, right? We're already practicing trauma-informed practices, safety planning, and case management. And we already do understand that pets are a part of the household unit. And when shelters are able to do this, people can come inside sooner, they can stay longer, they can stabilize faster. And that helps reduce reentry rates and keep families intact. As far as advocacy is concerned, advocates have a huge role in shaping state laws. This can look like pushing for pet custody statutes like the ones we talked about, so judges can consider the well-being of the animal instead of treating animals like furniture. It also means strengthening domestic violence laws, ensuring that survivors can include pets in restraining orders or access state-funded pet shelters, pet inclusive shelters, I mean. And as far as housing is concerned, advocates can push for clearer state level protections for tenants with companion animals, especially during evictions, temporary displacement, and many of these have bipartisan appeal, right? Like we said, they're fundamentally about public safety and reducing homelessness. Um, and yeah, I know that some um, public meetings with your elected officials can be really like, hey, I went to the sandwich shop and I want to know why I didn't get any mayo in it, right? A call out to like Parks and Recreation. Sometimes they can look like that, right? Sometimes, but it's your chance to be heard. It's a chance for your voice to be heard. And it's super important to be able to um, tell your elected officials, use your voice, right? And that's how these policies get pushed forward. And if you can't show up in person, that's okay. You can call in. If you can't call in, you can send in written comment, right? There are so many ways that we can really mobilize our communities to push for these statutes. And lastly, funders, right? Funders are essential in expanding what's already working. And one of the biggest gaps nationally is support for navigation services, and which honestly end up being part of the work that we do too. Like, yes, we're a legal services organization, but sometimes our paralegal is a caseworker who is taking time to help someone secure housing with their pet, get documentation, go with them to the Department of Social Services, right? This has happened, negotiating with landlords. And the unfortunate thing is that these services are rarely funded because they fall between housing rights, housing justice, animal well-being grant categories. So it's kind of a gray area, but funders can support communities projects like pop-up pet support and encampments, legal clinics, animal well-being, vet services, all in partnership with housing teams. And we know these programs provide so much good for our community members, but they also give us data. And that data, at the end of the day, will help show policymakers what's possible when systems treat pets as part of the family ecosystem. And even small investments like underwriting emergency foster care, like I said, it's a huge need, can make the difference between a family staying together or losing their animal during a crisis. All that to say is we don't need to wait for federal reform. We can start doing these things today because the law takes a long time.
And it catches up to what we are already doing. So if we take the steps and start doing the work, the law will sometimes catch up to, to recognize that, if we're out there living it and speaking it.
That's right. That's right. And that's all we have for y'all right now. Thanks for spending time with us and for the work that you are all doing to help keep families together. We're open for questions, but if you want to continue the conversation and connect one-on-one, our contact information is on the screen.
Thank you so much, Diana and Nathaly. We have some great questions in the chat. Um, One of the questions you shared a lot about some of the places in the states and provinces where the laws are beginning to change. Is there a place where people can find out if there are efforts underway to make those changes in their own communities?
So unfortunately, there isn't like one go-to place that we could go to. That would be like an excellent project for somebody to start, but it's just so unruly given how the law works in the US. Because like I mentioned sort of earlier, so every state has its own set of laws, right? We have the federal law, then we have every state has their own law, and then we have case law, like judge-made law, where judges are seeing cases in front of them, and then they're saying, you know what, I'm going to expand this, like just how we saw that one case in New York, which was about emotional damages and recognizing a dog as part of the immediate family. So it actually does sort of require you as an individual to become informed, become your own expert on your local laws. Like I mentioned before, sometimes there can be a specific law that is just for your city or just for your county. In California, there are, lots of laws that apply to everyone in California, but in the city of LA, every so often, we pass some kind of emergency provision. We do something to say, you know what, we need extra protection right now for these people, or we need a special program. So it really does kind of fall on you to kind of do that research and find out what applies, because the finding that out, knowing your rights is always the first step, in every in every journey of like advocacy for yourself and for others. You have to kind of know what your rights are first, and then you can kind of go from there.
Absolutely. Um, and I can certainly appreciate, the challenges that come with not just knowing what's happening federal, state, county, city, and then you're digging into the courts. It can be a lot to process. But if someone is in a community and they do their research and know their rights and they see they don't have these kinds of changes happening in their community, but they want to lead the effort. Is there a way to get connected with guidance from other communities that have been successful at proposing these policies?
Yes, Anna.
I think my first thought is connecting with your local tenant rights organizations. Tenant organizers are already they have their ears to the ground when it comes to housing policy, and they know when those meetings are happening. They know when to show up, when to call people in, when to send out those letters. So that's where I think I would start is connecting with your local tenant union, tenant rights organizations, because they are in the know and they're able to loop you in and help with that advocacy portion of it, right? Sometimes they have templates that you can go if you're not sure what to say. They're like, well, here's like a version that you could say and put your own spin on it. But yeah, that's where I would start. What do you think, Nathaly?
Yeah, I think also, it's going to be dependent on where you are. But, for instance, in Los Angeles, unhoused advocates are also a great place to kind of start, because those are kind of the people who are seeing those issues like directly in their day to day. Like we started off like helping tenants, and then we kept kind of getting more and more questions from unhoused folks who are saying, we're trying to find housing. And then it's like, oh, okay, and so we started to expand our area of expertise and how we help, because we realized, oh, this is the same. We can, the laws for shelter, for like for unhoused services are the same as the laws in housing. You have to recognize it. So I would say those are great experts. And also how we touched on like domestic violence shelters. I think those are also, especially if you find one that is pet inclusive, because not everyone has the funding they may want to be. But I think those individuals who work there, they're seeing the impacts, every day. And those are also experts who I think, care deeply about this issue. And they see like, oh, I have to turn away somebody because they have, we accept one dog, but we don't accept a dog and a cat. Or we only accept one cat, but we don't accept two cats. And so I think it's going to the people who are doing the work every day. That's the starting place. And you have to kind of see in your community, like what are the biggest issues. But those are the three kind of places I would go to first.
I think those are really good recommendations for starting a pretty powerful coalition that can also bring the stories to tell of what they see and can really help ground. I think one of the challenges when you're proposing changes to policy is sometimes helping people understand, if they haven't experienced it, that this is not an abstract concept or idea. This is grounded very deeply in real life experiences. And I think the three you suggested of tenants' rights organizations, of unhoused advocates, and domestic violence shelters can all really bring those voices. Um, in advocating for those policies, are there best practices or strategies that you've seen that were used to influence changes through legislation or even litigation that you would encourage others to think about?
Figure out whether the elected official has a pet. I mean, sometimes, right? Like you can identify a champion, be like, hey, you know what it's like. Like, I mean, that I think that's where some of that research comes down to. And it's what we do in our own work. Like, hey, so and so like has a dog. Let's see if we can that's our way in. Um, that's where my mind goes to. What about you?
And just in general, when you're doing like policy advocacy, what ends up happening, like the strongest results and the strongest groups, they set up meetings with their local elected officials, offices, and they go in, and it's not just about talking about the law. These lawmakers, they want to hear your story. If you have a story to share, something personal, that matters to them way more than, oh, this is a policy, advocate who's here, who's an expert on percentages and this and that. They want to hear from their constituents real life stories of what's been happening, how they've been impacted. And these individual stories can have a huge impact in like kind of capturing public attention. Like there was a very like a famous case with the county in Los Angeles where there was a puppy that was euthanized. There was a big board of supervisor meeting where people were like, we need to get to the bottom of this because that sounds so wrong. Everybody was appalled, and they said, how could this possibly happen? And that sort of then goes into kind of auditing the situation. So you have to bring, at the end of the day, I think people really respond to storytelling. We love the numbers to back it up, but the stories are the key to doing that. So if you can share your story, that's the most powerful thing that you can do. If you can share it publicly, that's incredible. That's so brave. But even if you can't, like Diana said, you can write a public comment. You can also just contact the local official. You can send them an email. They count how many times people reach out about a certain issue, and that's how they decide what they're going to do. So you do have to take that first step of speaking out about it. But if you've got a story to tell, please tell it.
Yeah. So it sounds like leveraging storytelling, but also just creating those pathways of, as someone who does regularly call their elected representatives about many things. I will say it sounds scary. It takes less than 5 minutes. So I feel like we've talked a lot about the positive movement. Is there opposition to these kinds of changes? And if so, what does that look like?
So like the biggest concern that I see, so there isn't like a group out there that's like, no, pets are not family, they're property. There isn't anyone that has like that kind of opposition, but you see opposition in terms of like specific issues. Like people are always concerned about liability. So the worry is that if we keep expanding, pets as family, we keep expanding that relationship and recognizing it legally, then oh, we're going to be liable in way more context and things are going to get expensive. Those are the types of things that judges say. Those are like the things that they consider when they're deciding if they're going to expand case law. That's when you start getting kind of smaller special interest groups. Like if we're talking about a law to make pet inclusive housing a bigger thing, the people who oppose that are landlords because they go, oh, this is going to be so much more expensive. I'm going to be liable. The insurance cost is gonna rise. Number of lawsuits. Those tend to be the people who are opposing these type of laws, but it's kind of on a case by case basis. And like Diana said, you know, pets are something that kind of everyone can care about. So even when you're getting that opposition, there is a way to sort of shift it and say, okay, sure, I get your concerns, but we need to do something about the reality, which is that pets are hugely important to people. And I think that it is sort of like a right. I think a human life is, I think that we enjoy caretaking. I enjoy like taking care of my plants. And I think that we need that engagement with like other life. And a pet relationship is so important, for us to kind of, like have a full good life. It really creates peace and it helps you through the hardest things in that people could possibly live through. Pets are often the you know the way to kind of come out of that situation, being okay.
Yeah, and if I can just piggyback really quickly, um, when we're talking about, yeah, like liability, and it's, yeah, like we're in the legal field, we hear that a lot. But I think it becomes especially frustrating when that is the barrier to, like if somebody needs an assistance animal. Shameless plug, assistance animal 101 tomorrow. We'll be talking about if you want to hear more. But um, all that to say is like, yeah, I would say the opposition I think does come in form in very real forms of like, hey, we don't want to get sued. So we're just gonna do a blanket policy. We're not writing ESA letters. We're not writing support animal letters, right? Kaiser does that. Kaiser recently did that.
Yeah.
They don't want to do any reasonable accommodations because people are litigious. But that is really creating more obstacles, I think, in the end for people to be able to live with their pets.
And it's a perception of being more litigious. It's not always that, like, it does, like the doctors who, like Kaiser not wanting to write a letter, their fear is that, oh, maybe there's going to be an incident where, let's say, an ESA dog bites a person. Um, the doctor would not be liable in that situation at all. Yet they're refusing to write the letter because they're worried about being liable for something that they couldn't possibly be liable for. So it's circular, but part of that is because of some laws can sometimes hurt the situation. And so in California we have a law that sort of was trying to. There's like an idea that people abuse the ESA like label. I've never met a single person that had an ESA that did not qualify for it, in our work. But in California, they passed like a law that added like kind of more restrictions, and it spooked the doctors. And so Kaiser and a lot of doctors said, you know what, I rather not get involved. And it just makes it so much more difficult for people who are disabled, who now have to go through even more hoops in order to kind of get the help they need. So it can be very frustrating.
Yeah, Natalie, I'm familiar with the law you're talking about.
Yes.
To share with others, the law was passed regarding licensure for therapists and counselors that created requirements for when they could write an ESA letter. For example, requiring them to have an established therapeutic relationship with the person that they're writing it for at least 30 days. It's pretty harmful, particularly for those who struggled with long-term housing instability or chronic homelessness, because they don't have access to good ongoing medical care. That's part of the instability. So, so one, it created barriers that were particularly harmful to our most vulnerable populations. But also, as Natalie said, just the threat of liability. You saw a bunch of people say, you know what, I'm out. You made this too hard. So it sounds like a good takeaway in terms of identifying opposition is around recognizing where it might create barriers for people and helping parse out like what's really a barrier versus what is a myth of a barrier or how they could
Yeah.
overcome it.
Yeah. I think insurance companies,
Mm.
that's the big one, because it's like doctors are worried about like malpractice insurance. Landlords are worried about like, commercial liability and like, housing insurance. Insurance is a big, they're a powerful group that I think we don't think of enough in terms of this and so many other areas.
That is a big one. Um, So one of the questions we also had in the chat, how can recognizing pets as family in the law actually help prevent evictions or housing denials for people with pets?
I can think of at least one um, housing law that I'm really fond of. And that's in the city of West Hollywood. If you are a senior, you're allowed to have, I think it's at least two companion animals. And that's also just recognizing that, hey, some people that are aging might really benefit from that support of having like a little critter with you. So you're not, lonely and you're able to like get up and do your things together. So I think that's an area where, hey, we recognize that pets are so much more than a commodity, right? Than we're talking about. They are integral parts of our family units. And I think for seniors in particular, like they're like, yeah, you know what? Doesn't have to be an ESA, doesn't have to be an assistance animal. Like you need it, you got it. Um, and I think that's at least one area where recognizing pets as family can ultimately help housing law.
Yeah, we talked before about like abusers in domestic violence context, but actually, dog animals come in a big role in like landlord harassment. Landlords will often use animals as like a pretext for trying to evict them. Maybe they're rent controlled. Maybe they've lived there for a long time. And they say, well, how can I get this person out? Well, what's a really easy way to do it? Say you need to get out, you need to give up your dog, or you need to get out, right? And people will get out. They will just leave because they're not going to give up their animal. Although sometimes people go to a shelter and they're crying, and they're there to give up their animal because they don't want to be unhoused, and it's a parent deciding for their children. Everyone's upset, but one parent goes and decides that they're going to take those steps. I think that West Hollywood law should be applicable to everybody. I think you should automatically get, once like two animals allowed, because it's going to prevent landlords from using this excuse, using animals as a pretext for evicting them for kind of other reasons. And they'll often say, well, animals cause damages, well, you are still responsible for fixing and paying for that in the same way that you would if your kid broke the window, and actually animals cause less damage than human children do. So that's something that, we're trying to use to convince housing providers to, accept animals and not just assume that it's going to be more expensive, because it actually isn't more expensive. So I think those are some of the things that come to mind.
I mean, two things I heard. One, I loved the mention of older adults. I know that is also then an opportunity to engage with other advocates to participate in this movement forward. And on the other end of the spectrum, TAY or transitioned age youth, I know that there are particularly high rates of pet ownership among transition age youth who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And that human animal bond is so incredibly important for both those vulnerable populations just to survival. And something that I started thinking about as you were talking, uh, you've mentioned how narrative and how storytelling around the human animal bond can be such a powerful component of being successful in this litigation or policy shift. Are there ways that service providers who could be involved in education or advocacy to push back against some of that future opposition that might come from landlords or insurance providers?
You said the word earlier, and I think that word was coalition. Right. Yeah, like being in partnership and leveraging the power of community and other groups that, like, hey, like this, we might have our own niche, like interests in a specific community, but we all want the same thing at the end of the day. So being able to, yeah, have like working groups, and really build momentum around that with people that specialize in other areas, I think yeah, could achieve great things.
Yeah, all the great changes that I've seen have often come through coalition work, of like combining those issues and combining, like, advocacy, like, you know, you go together to the public comment, portion of the meeting for city council. It's scary to go by yourself. It's not so scary if you've got, like, 20 people behind you that are there in support. It makes it so much easier, and it's so much more persuasive to, our policymakers.
How about that? Are there any coalition spaces that you're part of that you might recommend to others? Our current conference being, I think, the leading example of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right, right? Like, how did we become part of this conference? It's just working and being in coalition with My Dog Is My Home, and then kind of attending these type of events and connecting with others and seeing areas for overlap, and ways that you can continue to do that. And then, like, shout out to the BIPOC Collective, which is a coalition that we're a part of, that is kind of focused on, people of color in housing spaces. So you just have to find, there are so many groups out there, and if there isn't a coalition, start it. Sometimes that's what happens. Sometimes coalitions come about, like during the pandemic. There were so many coalitions that we were working with, to do all of that, and we're part of coalitions that operate at the state level and at the local level. And so you do have to do a little searching. But if you're in an area that doesn't have, all of this set up, this is your opportunity. Leaders are not born, they're made. And sometimes, and you just sometimes, how do you become a leader? Well, I was the only one in the room who started talking, right? And that's kind of how it starts. So, build your own coalition if there isn't one that you can just easily join.
Yeah, and if that's too daunting, like start maybe smaller working groups. My Dogs My Home has regional working groups. So at the end of this all, if y'all want to connect with people that are within your communities working towards some policy change, that's also an option.
Wonderful. I love that we're ending on a call to action. Incredible. Uh, Thank you so much, Diana and Natalie. I really appreciated not only moderating, but just getting to attend this presentation and learn from both of you. And it looks like we're at our time. Thank you, everyone, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kris.
Thank you, Kris.
Bye.
Chasing